Well, I had no idea at the time, but 1966 was a collage of extraordinary well, I want to say in hindsight, miracles for me. Virtually feeling desperate about the job situation. I went to some employment bureaus. It was a time of full employment. Living in a time of not full employment like we've had for decades now in Western countries, you can't really imagine a world in which, okay, I was doing rather well for my age as regards education, school achievements, A-levels, diploma in business studies. But I could apply anywhere and they would say, yes, you can come join our trainee scheme and so on. Whether it was Marconi's or where they would have also sent me to get a degree at a CAT, College of Advanced Technology. 6 months working with Marconi's, 6 months studying. I got into acceptance of that, but I didn't accept it. Well, I attended for one day, and they wanted me to, as a trainee, to go through all the departments. And the first one was where I was going to be in the factory floor working on a lathe, and I thought, there's no way I'm doing this. I am not suited to, I'm an academic already. I'm not going to be working a lathe. I mean, quite honestly, in psychological terms, it was beneath me. And by lunchtime, I was at home again with Mum, and I said, no, I'm not staying there. There was a narrow escape from yet another drudgery, in this case, sort of apprenticeship, albeit also elite destination in management, but, personnel work, in fact. A 5-year sandwich course. I'd already experienced what drudgery could be in a London office-type job, of course, as I said on the recording on the previous year, just earlier here. I was sitting in employment agents in High Holborn. It was an upstairs, very non-impressive little firm. I looked across the street and, somehow or other they were whoever it was discussing with me what I could do, and I said, well, I don't know, I'd possibly like to get into advertising. Oh, you never manage it, you have to start as office boy, and it takes forever to work up, I don't think you'll enjoy that. And it's everybody wants to do that sort of thing. I mean, it's very hard to get in, very hard indeed. In other words, that was ruled out. I looked across from the window where we were sitting there, and there was Crawford's Advertising. I went down across the street, High Holborn, into reception. She said, well, you could see Mr. Lloyd, head of press department. And within a week, I'd got a job as progress chaser in the television department. I mean, formally an incredible gift of a job to a young lad of 19. I was you could say highly motivated, but I'd had such success in academic, just at tech college and school, that nothing could stop me. I would take the initiative where others would be discouraged. Of course, I had that sort of mum too, who always encouraged. She wanted what she understood, of course, to be the best for her son. She would like me to have become an officer in the army. Yeah. Thank goodness that didn't happen. And Dad felt he was an achiever. In a sense he was, of course, but it's rather easy to be an achiever if you start off wealthy. And Mum was an achiever. I mean, she started off very poor, but again, she had an astonishing wealth of incredibly good looks. She was Hollywood material, without a doubt. In fact, she was of the opinion she could beat them all. And perhaps she could too. She was absolutely stunning. Long red hair. Curly red hair, long hair. Beautiful. A Rita Hayworth type. And better, she felt. And I think she possibly was too. Rita Hayworth was one of these Hollywood stars of, I don't know, 50s, was it? 60s, I don't know, yeah. In other words, yes, they did both do exceptionally, outstandingly well in worldly terms of achievement, in getting each other and work and so on, and living conditions compared to the ordinary person. They were not ordinary. They weren't elite, but they were big fish in a little pool, if you know what I mean. So Marshall actually had built into him from Mum and Dad, one way and another, an ego that was as big as a house. And he was precocious, noisy, dominant, a boy apart, down to the depths or up to the throne. He travels fastest, who travels alone. I was a very good worldling. Yeah, sort of a contradiction of terms, isn't it? I wasn't impressed with television department. I felt they were a sham. Everything about advertising was a sham. And I didn't like being in an occupation that was creating wants, needs. Well, wants, not really needs. In a world that I felt needed to be satisfied with meeting needs, not creating wants. This is not the best motivation to have behind you if you're in advertising, of course. I was increasingly finding that the employment world was a sham. When I moved to the press department, technically I was an account manager or trainee and such. Within a few months, I did the chap's job who I was replacing in half a week instead of a whole week. By Wednesday afternoon I was reading the paper because I'd finished all the work that needs to be done in my job. You could say some were very impressed. Management. You could say some were extremely jealous. Other people in the same room. One of the girls who I hadn't thought of making an enemy of by any means played a practical joke on me and pretended she was my girlfriend phoning me, and I can't remember the details, but I was deceived and thought I was talking to her. And then I realised I'd been taken for a ride by someone in the same room on another set of desks. And the girls had played a practical joke. My goodness. The room was on fire when I realised this. I turned on this young girl and bawled her out in the same fashion as I'd seen my dad bawl Mum out so often. I was filled with self-righteous anger, and the whole room was absolutely silent. Nobody was going to risk stopping this young man who was dangerous in this state. A dangerous self-righteousness state. And I think she went white. I was tall, remember, but thin. I mean, I was a young man. Yeah. You could say unstable as my dad, really. And Mum. And a confidence that was a sort of match for the self-righteousness of a Napoleon or Hitler. I was sort of impressed with myself in this experience and realization, and puzzled as to what my future was going to be. I didn't fit in the employment world. I just didn't. I held it in contempt, and I felt it was extremely unloving. One of my accounts was Locational Office Bureau, encouraging firms in particular and people to move out of the city, that London might shed 1 million of its inhabitants. It was thought that it was just too big, and well, it was probably around 7 million at the time. And it did go down, and advertising was one. We would make things like these cards in tube trains advertising, where people stood commuting. They'd look at something that was a chap playing golf before breakfast in the morning because he lives and works in the country and it's a much better way of life. And I was persuaded by what I was doing. For once I was advertising something that I actually believed in. And so what did I do? I decided I'd find a job locally. I don't care what the money is or what the future is. I want a job that's worthwhile, that's noble in itself, in the right environment, and I want living, not a career. Wow. You might think this is an incredibly backward look compared to my achievements at the time for such a young man. I applied to teaching. I was offered a primary school or a secondary school locally where I lived in Essex, and I took the secondary school in self-interest because I thought, I was only 19, and I thought, I'm going to relate rather well to the older girls. And I can relate to the boys too, in that I'm an achiever. And they can be an achiever, even though they're in what was a secondary school, and I think possibly the very first year of it being a comprehensive school. So I went to teach in Rochford, Essex, town next to, not far from Rayleigh, the small town I was in. So would you believe it, by the September of that year, 1966, I'd finished my year in the city and was now a student teacher at half the salary I had in London. First week or so catching a bus, well, I don't know, 6 miles, 7 miles perhaps, to work. Teaching maths 3 days a week and sport 2 days a week in a school of about probably 1,200 students of 11 to 15 age range in those days. Amazingly, I mean, you could do this for 2 years as a trainee teacher without being qualified, before qualifying in fact. I was taking classes entirely on my own. I just about never had a teacher in there with me. I think possibly once. And he said, well, you seem to be managing okay, Mr. White, my head of maths department. You'll be okay. Here's the textbook, get on with it. They have, a set of textbooks here, and these are the exercise books, and this is how we do it, and your room's next to mine, and come in if you need any help. And I didn't. Well, only trivial things like, what other stationery's available and so on. And I found I could teach. Wow, did I enjoy teaching. It was such a freedom, it was so meaningful, it was worthwhile in itself. I loved relating to the kids. Suddenly I was in charge at school of people and children, and I could do it. I could make maths fun. I was dominant, you would say a violent teacher. I brook no difficulty with difficult kids. I mean, I would rule. Things were much more physical in those days. And, of course, I was... it was so good. I so enjoyed work. Within a week or so, I was offered by the lady who was head of art, young married lady, lived very close to where I lived in Rayleigh. She gave me a lift in each day and home each day, and even let me drive her Mini, because I didn't have a car, you see. I was so helped by people, teachers at school, many of them, so helpful to a young teacher. Kids so enthusiastic because you're of a young age, young teacher, young man. I could relate to the boys terrifically. Sport, Suddenly I realized I was doing something that I really valued. I was to do that job for the full 2 years, and that way I'd completed 3 years, of course, and could go to university as an independent student. I must say the other lovely thing in that year was Diane. I saw her on the railway station one day during the day when I must have been going up for an interview. to get the advertising job I was talking about. And I decided I was going to sit in the same compartment as her. There was very few people during the day travelling. So I sat and talked opposite her to her. I was reckless in my ability to talk to strangers where I felt I could or should. And I was on the pickup. She was my sort of girl. And she fell for me. Gosh, I was flying. Adorable soul she was, Diane. A trainee ballet dancer, quarter ballet in London, unable to continue her work because she'd torn her Achilles tendon. And she was both lovely and a sweetheart, and tiny, fractionally something like half an inch shorter than she was supposed to be for quarter ballet. So when we danced with each other, ordinary ballroom dancing, I could pick her up with one arm, swing her around. Yeah, thank you, Heavenly Dad. Such miracles of provision, both work-wise, rescue from work-wise as well. And Diane, filling the void of, I don't know, a couple of years without Linda, whom I still loved at that point in time. But she had another partner, of course. Because I didn't own these amazing things, good fortune, including the academic success of the previous years. I didn't own it to God. I knew why God couldn't exist. And of course, a person who knows he's right, who has the confidence that was built into Marshall, the ego, from a loving mum, doesn't see beyond what he knows self-righteously to be right. The secular can be easily as outright, as self-righteous as the religious, you know. My dad was, my mum was too, really. Much kinder soul mum, but Dad was kind in his way, just I couldn't see it. Really. And I was kind, although I was an extremely dominant teacher. This was a great blessing to kids who needed to be protected in the jungle of comprehensive secondary type schools, you know. And I was fierce in protecting them too. You didn't mistreat other kids when I was on the scene. If you did, you regretted it fast. And the kids knew it. And the staff knew that I had no trouble controlling the kids and was popular and was liked. But that brought envy, and I found, well, that's another story in the next year. Thank you, Heavenly Dad. But the overall miracle was that I'd shifted from a world career to something I felt was truly worthwhile in itself. Not profit motivated, not career motivated, but meeting human need. I mean, teaching is a vocation, isn't it? Suddenly I'd switched from a worldly occupation to a vocation. I would later in my university career switch from the humanist to the religious, and finally in life from the religious to what I'd have to call spiritual, and mean by it specifically God-centered. Life for real. For all, therefore. How astonishing. Thank you, Heavenly Dad.